We've had to sanction ministers of other governments because of the violent rhetoric and the abuse of human rights that they have sponsored. I think it's time now to take a system approach to this, which is it is not just individual settlers or individual ministers. It is actions of the Israeli state with E1, the government out there, and it is widespread in the West Bank. The time is now. If the time isn't now, I would say to colleagues, when would be the right time to take action?
Andy Burnham is now expected quite soon to announce new sanctions on Israeli settlements in the West Bank. This is while an argument goes on behind him in the Labour Party about how far to go with sanctions. Not all of his colleagues agree on this. We can first of all get the thoughts of Andrew Pakes, who's the Labour MP for Peterborough, who's also the co-chair of the Labour Friends of Palestine and the Middle East. Hi to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, John. Nice to join you.
You're very welcome. You then, Andrew, support sanctions. Just set out your argument.
Well, I think this has been a long time coming, and I will certainly be using the opportunity of Parliament returning next week to make the case to the government I support that they need to take further action. I think I've been on your show before, and we've said there's got to be red lines about taking action when abuses of human rights, when settler violence, when other attacks happen. And every time we've gone over that red line, it feels like the existential risk now to the two-state solution, the E1 settlement, which could split that whole region and part of the region apart, means that we have a moral and, I believe, an economic duty to act.
Right, there's been a steady trend in Israel for these illegal settlements to be set up on the West Bank. Now it's gone into a new phase where the government's backing a construction project as a matter of government policy. But we have seen sanctions taken in the past, Andrew, haven't we, against settlement leaders, against ministers in the government, the hardliners like Smotrich and Ben Gvir. Do you believe those sanctions have had any effect?
I think we've been turning the dial up on sanctions, and I think there's been a case for a long time now that we need to have a comprehensive package. This is about state-supported violence in the West Bank, the support of the violence of the illegal settlements, illegal in international law. This isn't just the UK making up its own decisions about this. It means that we need to take a comprehensive sanctions against settlers in the West Bank. It will be difficult. Lots of things in this world are difficult. If they were easy, we'd find quicker solutions to it. Okay. I think the time is now right. If we don't act now, it will be too late if we allow the E1 to go through with just warm words and no action.
Well, the E1, of course, is the government policy encouraging this trend of settlements. And when you say you want to see more done, just give me an idea of what you have in mind. What kind of extra sanctions?
Well, I would support trade sanctions and services sanctions against any trade with illegal settlements in the West Bank. We've seen, rightly so, sanctions against individuals, particularly individual ministers. And just saying that out loud sounds absurd. We've had to sanction ministers of other governments because of the violent rhetoric and the abuse of human rights that they have sponsored. I think it's time now to take a system approach to this, which is it is not just individual settlers or individual ministers. It is actions of the Israeli state with E1, the government out there, and it is widespread in the West Bank. The time is now. If the time isn't now, I would say to colleagues, when would be the right time to take action?
What about the problem of sanctioning the West Bank settlements and the settlers and the businesses operating in those settlements without it becoming a set of sanctions involving Israel as a whole? Or do you want to see that? Is that where you want to go with this?
I think sanctions against these sanctions in the settlements is the next step I would like to see a system thing. Of course it's difficult, but we have a government which can use its political power to send a signal to Palestinians in the West Bank, to Christians in the West Bank, can send signal to the Israeli government that we do not accept and do not acknowledge. And what we've done well as a government in the past is bring together the international community, where we've had Australia, Canada, France, other countries joining with us. I think with a new Prime Minister who has made some great steps forward in stepping up our action against these illegal settlements, the forthcoming parliamentary season, it's time we turn the dial up yet again.
But what about that question that's raised over this of it is not the policy to sanction everything that's produced and exported out of Israel, and the policies you're arguing for could lead to that, could amount to that?
Look, I think these things are always taken in the balance. I think the risks of not taking action and sanctioning illegal settlements and the violence and the abuses of human rights, the near terrorism that's happening to ordinary Christians and Muslim Palestinians in the area means we need to act. Of course, this is difficult. Every trade area is a difficult thing to do. The price of inaction will be a moral stain on this country if we don't take action in the coming weeks.
Yeah, but the logic of what you're saying is that you take this action with the idea of punishing the settlers and the illegal settlers and those who support them. But if that amounts to a set of sanctions against Israel, well, then that's just how it is. That's just an unavoidable consequence. And that is your position then.
Well, look, it's not. No one is calling for at this precise moment for a boycott of our whole country. We know through the peace movement, through the trade unions, through many people in Israel, there are people who oppose what the Netanyahu government and what the settlers are doing in the illegal settlements. I think we will be able to ban a significant amount of trade and services in the West Bank. If people want to seek ways around that and game the system, it is our job to come up with a solution, which means we reduce that as well. Doing nothing because things are difficult is not the political option I think is morally right at this stage.
Right, there's another argument that's being deployed against the kind of action you're proposing, and it's this: that these are policies that are being executed by the Benjamin Netanyahu coalition government. Now, not everyone in Israeli politics, not everyone in Israel agrees with Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. And in taking this action, you may create more of a reaction, a defensive view among a wider range of Israelis, where people rally round against the punishing sanctions you're proposing. And that could weaken the possibility of the Netanyahu, well, being driven or being replaced by an administration with I suppose, a view more conducive.
No, let's be clear. Prime Minister Netanyahu is stirring up division and hatred and using many of the actions happening with the settlers and his government policy to try and destroy the idea of a two-state solution and make it impossible for us to get to a peaceful situation in front. But look, we've been here, John, many times before. At every stage when we've talked about some action, someone has said this will reinforce the bad faith actors of Netanyahu and others around that. Every time we've said that, something worse has happened. Tens of thousands of young people have lost their life. We had a peace deal, but we've seen bombing in Gaza. We've had reconciliation beginning to happen, but we've still seen attacks happen in the West Bank. We've now seen E1 and the expansion. If not now, when? The moral imperative here to keep alive the idea of a two-state solution, but also to use the political leverage of the United Kingdom, which has a special interest in this region of the world, to say what is right and what is wrong is a really important moral endeavour. And I hope, knowing from some of the peace movement and the campaigners who want to see a different government in Israel, that this may well give them the state to say, because I don't think they want to see Israel become a state which has other countries around the world taking it on, but Israel government itself has to take some responsibility for its own actions.
Okay, Andrew Pakes, Labour MP, thank you. And we can get the thoughts of Aubrey Allegretti now, the Times chief political correspondent. Hello to you, Aubrey.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi, Aubrey. So you've been bringing us the news of this tension inside the Labour Party. You heard Andrew Pakes, the Labour MP, who wants tough action there. What did you make of what you heard from Andrew Pakes, and what is the state of this debate inside government and in the Labour Party?
I mean, he sums up the huge political pressure that's been building on this issue, not just for months, but years, really. Andrew Pakes there was basically talking about how Andy Burnham, should one of his sort of first acts after coming back in September, try and introduce this kind of trade ban, which would be to punish Israel for allowing the settlement expansion into East Jerusalem in the E1 area by publishing contracts, which would actually sort of take effect just before the general election and therefore make it harder to sort of unwind them and row back on those sort of expansions. The Labour MPs that I've spoken to are broadly speaking very supportive of the idea of a ban on both goods and services, which would put the UK further ahead than other countries that have instituted similar attempts at restrictions, including Ireland and Spain, which I believe have only banned goods so far themselves. But there are others who are warning about the risk of a sort of trade backlash from the US, obviously Israel's closest and most powerful ally, and suggestions that Donald Trump wouldn't take too kindly to a move like that and could indeed punish the UK by issuing new trade restrictions or tariffs himself in sort of retaliation for a move like this from the UK.
Right, so difficult balances are going to have to be struck by the Prime Minister and the British government. It's worth pointing out, Aubrey, isn't it, that Andy Burnham is clearly on record saying he thinks tougher action against Israel can and should be taken. He's even, if not rebuked, he's put some distance between himself and the way this was handled under the Keir Starmer government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Andy Burnham's been particularly forthright on this issue. He hasn't criticised his predecessor on sort of many levels, but one of the most stringent he has is the party's sort of tone and approach to the handling of the Israel-Palestine conflict and support for Palestine. Now, obviously, supporters of Keir Starmer will say it was on his watch that the UK government formally recognised Palestine as a formal state in its own right, an ambition that Labour MPs have been pushing for a long time. But Andy Burnham, this isn't just a sort of ambition for him to come up with some form of sanctions and trade restrictions to try and reduce the sort of economic imperatives of doing business with companies that are operating in these settlement areas. This is something that he's taken advice on and is considering and likely to announce pretty imminently, i.e. in the first couple of weeks, coming back to Parliament. So it is something he feels really passionate about.
And maybe we should take into account, with all of this tension in the Labour Party and pressure for action, at the Labour Party conference, which is coming up at the end of September, there would be quite a row about this. And it would, I suppose Andy Burnham would think it would serve him well politically to get this in some ways sorted out by then.
Certainly, there are usually sort of issues overhanging Labour conference, which if the leadership doesn't get ahead of them, then the membership will do it for them. We saw last year pressure building on Keir Starmer to announce the big developments in, for example, how he was going to proceed with the Hillsborough Law, the new duty of candour, given that the conference was taking place in Liverpool and he'd already missed his stated sort of deadline of getting that legislation passed several months earlier. This year, if Andy Burnham doesn't announce the new sanctions and a potential trade ban on products and goods and services originating from Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, then he's going to face pressure from party members to do so, and he will risk the whole issue blowing up in his face effectively. So he's kind of caught in quite a difficult position, because not only does he have Labour conference at the end of next month, he also has UNGA, which is the sort of ugly terminology for the UN General Assembly. That is where he would come face to face with Donald Trump, who he's openly talked about meeting in the coming weeks. And it might mean that the two get off on a bit of the wrong foot if they don't see eye to eye on this issue, which they're very unlikely to.
All right. Aubrey Alagrassi, Chief Political Correspondent for The Times. Thank you for joining us, Aubrey.